full-service immigration law firm based in Milwaukee. I live and work in Green Bay. I grew up in Manitowoc and went to St. Robert College and then later to the University of Minnesota for law school. I lived in Green Bay for many years. And I worked at St. Robert College for about 17 years advising international students and scholars there on their immigration needs and guiding the college on its immigration compliance. And then I got back into practicing immigration law a few years ago. I was telling Jim when I arrived, because we were the first ones here, that today is kind of special for me because it's bookended by two great literacy organizations. I'm on the board of Literacy Green Bay, and we happened to have a breakfast event this morning that celebrated the accomplishments of the literacy learners there. And it's my pleasure to be with you tonight at your in-service, and I really appreciate the invitation, Heather, to share with you some information about the naturalization process. Heather asked me some time ago, and boy did those months fly by, to come and speak with you and provide an overview of naturalization. I know in part because I work closely with the folks at Literacy Green Bay, and I have had great contact with Fox Valley Literacy Council in a number of ways the last couple of years, that the work you do is very important in terms of supporting the various needs that the folks you're working with have, including their goals to become U.S. citizens and all that that entails. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation I'm going to share, and I want to stress that this is an overview. It's pretty general because the area of naturalization is complex, and I would say it's has become increasingly complicated in the last couple of years for a variety of reasons that we can discuss. And then I'm going to save some time at the end for questions and answers. I'm going to plan on speaking for maybe 35 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time. I'm sure many of you do have questions. I wonder, though, before starting my remarks, if I could just ask all of you who are here, if anybody would like to offer maybe something that they're hoping to learn tonight. Like when you heard that the in-service was going to be on this subject, was there something that came to mind that you're really wanting to know about naturalization? Anybody?
For me, the steps that an individual goes through when they've been in the country legally, lost their legal status, are back in the process and are in temporary status, it's all very complicated to me, and I'm trying to understand it better.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Anyone else?
Yeah, since I will be going through this process, so I thought it's better to just attend this this meeting to just learn about this process. And I heard like it's really complex as you said, sorry, and it's getting complex. So I thought maybe if you could shed some light for especially someone who is going through this process, that would be awesome.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else?
Hey, maybe a question about
Sure.
where we're at with the naturalization process for people who have green cards and want to go through the naturalization process but might have some offenses like maybe a DWI or some of those things, and I understand that there's been a lot of tightening from this administration allowing various people to get through. I wonder where that's at.
Okay, sounds good, thank you. Good, okay, well let's get started then. So as I mentioned, our firm is based in Milwaukee. We handle all types of immigration law, employment related, which is not an area in which I work, but our firm was founded on corporate-based or employment-based immigration, working with employers and would-be employees on their immigration needs. I work on the family-based side of our firm with people who are petitioning for family members to immigrate to the United States. That includes removal defense, where we are representing people in immigration court in Chicago. And then we also work in my department on humanitarian cases such as asylum, temporary protected status, visas for victims of domestic violence and other crimes, and so on. I'm based in Green Bay. I do have hours at Catholic Charities in Green Bay, as well as here at Catholic Charities, which is now located in the Levin Building, as many of you probably know. I'm also in Manitowoc at the Catholic Charities there once or twice a month. Our firm has a close tie with Catholic Charities and a number of other nonprofits, so that's an area, a place where you can find me. And I will mention now that, as some of you know, our firm offers complimentary consultations for individuals referred by your organization, as well as those referred by other nonprofits in the area. So if there is someone who you think could benefit from sitting down with me or one of our other attorneys for a half an hour or so just to talk about their situation, answer questions they might have, that is a no-cost service that we provide, again, for people referred by organizations like yours. And to make an appointment, they would just call the number on my business card, which you can get on the way out if you would like to do that.
That's through Catholic Charities.
It is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The number on my card is to our firm's main office in Milwaukee, but my office space is at Catholic Charities. Mm-hmm. And then after the consultation, of course, there's no obligation for the individual to hire us, but if they would be interested in talking to us, we can certainly share with them at that time what we estimate would be the type of case that they would have. It might not be naturalization, it might be some other type of immigration matter that they could be eligible, immigration benefit they could be eligible for, and we'll also be able to quote them how much our legal fees would be if they would like to consider hiring us. So, an overview of our agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits of citizenship, which many of you, well, all of you probably are very aware of. Eligibility for naturalization, applying for naturalization and all that entails. After filing for naturalization, how people prepare for the naturalization interview. What some exemptions from the naturalization requirements might be. Issues when applying for naturalization, like sometimes criminal issues in a person's background and things like that, like we've mentioned. And then, as I said, questions and answers at the end. Also, if we can't get to every question tonight, or if there's something really specific to somebody you're working with or helping, we can certainly always talk by phone too, if that would be helpful to you. So, benefits of U.S. citizenship, or why people would want to pursue that and sacrifice and spend so much time and effort and other resources to get there. Obviously, voting is one benefit, and in this current political situation and with the presidential election on the horizon, that is certainly motivating for people. The ability to bring family members to live in the United States, the opportunity to obtain citizenship for a child that's born abroad. For example, if a person is outside the United States and gives birth to a child, if that person gives birth to a child or is the father of that child, that person, that parent can be able to obtain citizenship for the child more easily if he or she is already a U.S. citizen. Traveling with a U.S. passport, and then being eligible for federal jobs and being eligible to run for elected office. Those aren't all of the benefits of being a U.S. citizen, but there are some. And something of a threshold question that is important for a would-be naturalization applicant to ask is, might I already be a U.S. citizen? And it's something maybe both of you can keep in mind too, as you're working with folks and are assisting in studying for citizenship. Sometimes that's worth a consultation with us. Maybe someone in their family petitioned for them a long time ago, or maybe they entered the United States as a youngster and one parent was a U.S. citizen and one parent was a citizen of another country. They might be a citizen and not realize it, and there are ways that we can kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together with them and possibly determine that they already enjoy that status. So. So there are many eligibility criteria the government looks at for naturalization. And one thing that I alluded to and that someone mentioned at the beginning is that, certainly in the last couple of years, under the Trump administration, there have been, many announcements, memoranda, policy initiatives, and so on that have affected certainly a lot of the individuals and families we all are involved in and care about. Generally speaking, the laws have not changed. Policy making is one thing, but the foundation of immigration policy, the laws that are in place, including those that govern eligibility for naturalization as an example, have not changed. I'll talk a little bit later about some possible changes that could be on the horizon, but for now, generally speaking, these are the criteria to apply to become a U.S. citizen. So someone has to be in lawful permanent resident, we abbreviate it as LPR or green card status, generally for 3 or 5 years. Mm-hmm.
Could you define naturalization?
You bet. Great question, and thank you, because sometimes I jump in with certain presumptions, but citizenship can be attained according to our laws at birth, or can be obtained through a process which we refer to as naturalization. So again, this is one area that has been in the news in the last year or two, and even during the presidential campaign. That birthright citizenship has been, sort of the law of the land, if you will, in the United States, and something that has, been in place for many, many years. There is some question as to whether the Constitution and our laws actually, really, guarantee birthright citizenship. Some people feel that that is a debatable legal construct. But at this time, if someone is born in the United States, he or she is considered a citizen. If they are not and they wish to become a citizen, the process that we have in place is called naturalization. So people talk about, like clients I work with and so on, maybe don't use that term. So they would say apply for citizenship, it's the same thing. So usually, being in permanent resident status, having a green card for 5 years is the typical requirement. 3 years would be available to someone whose green card had been based, for example, on a marriage. So if I'm working with a couple where one person is a U.S. citizen and the other person is not, they go through the green card process based on the marriage, and the non-U.S. citizen becomes a permanent resident or green card holder by way of the marriage. That individual can apply for citizenship 3 years down the road. But for the vast majority of people, including refugees, for example, I know a lot of you probably have learners you're working with who are refugees, 5 years is kind of the magic number. There are special requirements in terms of naturalization for example, persons in the military. I'm not going to be speaking about that tonight because it is sort of a separate category, but just so you're aware that there are exceptions to all of the criteria. The next two.
If a naturalized citizen marries someone from another country, can that spouse only have to wait 3 years to become a citizen also?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I just started working with a couple. The fellow became a naturalized citizen recently. He was originally from Central America and was a permanent resident for a number of years, was eligible to become a citizen, naturalized, had his oath ceremony and everything. As soon as he had his naturalization certificate, he could apply for his spouse, who is a citizen of another country, to become it.
Right. One of my students is a naturalized citizen, and he got married And so his wife now lives here, and she only has to wait 3 years to apply for citizenship, is that correct?
Did he petition for her to become a permanent resident
Yeah,
already?
she's working on the card, on
yep,
the
yep,
documents
exactly.
right now and all that.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so the next two concepts are distinct but related to each other and are often confused or confusing. Another criterion is that the person must have continuous residence in the United States, which means that they have time residing in the US without any single absence long enough to break continuity. So with some exceptions, 6 months is something of a tipping point. In other words, after a person becomes a permanent resident, they really have to be careful about how much time they spend outside the United States on any given trip. You know, to go home and visit or to their previous home, you know, to visit family, things like that. You know, typically trips of, you know, a few weeks, a few months are not going to threaten their eligibility to become a naturalized citizen down the road. But the Immigration Service looks very closely at how many months they have been outside the United States for any, you know, on any single trip, and that can be a sticking point sometimes.
This may be another lecture, but this starts out with a person who's a lawful, an LPR.
Uh-huh.
How do you get to be that?
Mm-hmm.
What's that? I don't know what.
Sure, yep, definitely cover that. To become a lawful permanent resident, generally a person is going to need to have available to them one of a very limited number of pathways. So again, you know, a lot of what we're hearing in the news and so on is, you know, these days, legal versus illegal immigration and so on. The fact is, there are not that many ways for someone to become a green card holder. One would be if they have a US citizen or permanent resident relative, like a spouse, child, you know, sometimes a grandparent can come into the picture. Being able to immigrate by way of a particular family relationship, either coming from the country of origin based on that relationship and going through all the necessary processes, or maybe once the person is here in a different immigration status, trying to avail themselves of one of those pathways, which may or may not be available to them depending on their circumstances. Another way to become a permanent resident would be based on a qualifying job through an employer. Like I mentioned earlier, 1/2 of our firm works in employment-based or corporate-based immigration. And an individual would have to have an employer willing to petition for them to become a permanent resident based on a particular type of employment or job offer. And generally, those are going to be, you know, the highly skilled types of positions. So it is very challenging to obtain permanent residency based on employment. A few other ways that permanent residency might be attained would be, let's say, if someone did go through the removal or deportation process and was eligible for a defense to removal based on, let's say, again, very limited criteria, but maybe having been in the United States for more than 10 years, having a, you know, a clean criminal record, having US citizen family members who would suffer extreme hardship if that person were deported. If all those criteria and others are met, sometimes a person can obtain permanent residency or green card status within the immigration court context, or you know, as a result of winning their deportation case. Very difficult, but sometimes that can be a way that someone has become a permanent resident. For the most part, I mean, there's really not a way for someone to ask to be a permanent resident without something like that, one of those relationships, sets of circumstances, being part of their picture. That's why so many people, are in the United States without any real way, in the United States maybe without status, and without a way to get status or to get permanent residency.
What about asylum cases?
Yes, asylum, so thank you. So asylum or humanitarian cases would be another avenue for someone to obtain residency. Refugees and asylees generally have to meet the same type of criteria to attain either refugee or asylee status. So a refugee applying for that status while still outside the United States, and asylee gaining that asylee status after coming to the United States and applying, to be recognized as an asylee. Generally, that's a temporary status, and then they can later apply for permanent residency. Again, provided that they meet all of those requirements. The requirements for permanent residency or green card status, which are the same thing, are also very strict. People might have a qualifying family relationship. They might have an employer, a job offer that looks like it's going to meet the criteria. They might have been in asylee status or U visa status, let's say, because they were able to get temporary status based on being a victim of a crime. If all the other eligibility criteria don't align, if there are other things going on in their background that the Immigration Service is concerned about, they might not qualify for green card status. And that could be, again, the policies in effect at this time are becoming more enforcement oriented. So, tightening the screws, if you will, across the Department of Homeland Security kind of sub offices, ICE and USCIS and so on, really scrutinizing those applications for permanent residency such that some people who, again, in some ways might be eligible, might be denied based on could be something relatively minor in their past. So again, it is a long journey just to get to being a green card, and then later seeing about eligibility for citizenship. So another related concept then in terms of residency is, that is to say residency within the United States, is physical presence in the United States. So the Immigration Service will look at the total number of days that the person was physically present in this country during their eligibility criteria. And when I say during the eligibility period, so that period being 5 years, the Immigration Service will look at the last 5 years from the date that the person is applying for citizenship, and tally the number of days that they were in the United States and the number of days that they were outside the United States. For a lot of people who, might have arrived here as refugees or applied to be asylees and then later became permanent residents, they might not have travel issues for sort of, given the circumstances, they might not have occasion or feel safe, traveling to their home countries. So maybe these issues, second and third bullet points, are maybe not going to be as relevant when they apply for citizenship. But for somebody, maybe who doesn't fear returning to their home country and has occasion and resources to travel back and forth, those two things can be, as I said, kind of sticking points when it comes to determining their eligibility for naturalization. And when they fill out the application, the N-400 for citizenship, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, for the most part, the USCIS website version and the version we use with our software helps tally those days as they enter the date they left the United States and the date they returned to the United States. The form kind of tallies automatically, which is really helpful to kind of see, where are we here with the number of days they've been physically present. Another criterion is good moral character.
Before you go on there, the 2 and 3 there, you're saying it's the 5 years previous to when they're starting to fill out the N-400 form? Is
Correct.
that about right? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So the date they're applying, backtracking from that 5 years.
Okay.
Yep. Good moral character is very broad, but it would include things like, has the person had arrests, citations, criminal history. Okay, they have to disclose everything and anything. It doesn't mean they're gonna be denied based on a speeding ticket or something like that, but they have to disclose it because they could be denied on not having disclosed it. And this is something, I'll say just anecdotally, that we're hearing more of, where at the naturalization interview, let's say, especially somebody who might not be represented by counsel and just didn't realize that they were supposed to disclose that sort of thing, might not have, and then next thing they know, they are being accused of misrepresenting themselves, which is a whole other kettle of fish, can of worms, whatever metaphor you want to use, it's not good. So one of the things that we're really emphasizing when we do consults with people and go through that intake is, have you ever talked to a police officer under any circumstances, try to really, for their own good, make sure that we're discussing any type of contact they've had that might have been even a minor citation. And then we can also advise them, or if we're representing them, on obtaining any records that might be necessary to submit. Often it will not be necessary to do anything other than say, yes, I had the speeding ticket, here were the dates, and I paid the fine. For other violations or types of arrests and so on, we might need court records to be submitted with the naturalization application. So, yep, go ahead.
Is that criminal history restricted to the 5 years prior to the application as well? Or if they have had legal contact before that 5-year period, does it still need to be disclosed?
Thank you, very, very good question. So the application uses the language of ever, have you ever, etc. So they should disclose, really anything outside of, anything ever. But it's the 5-year period that's going to be considered, most relevant in terms of good moral character. For example, sometimes there could be certain types of crimes that even, if they were longer ago, or let's say regardless of when they happened, they're going to be a deal breaker. I mean, there are just certain, and I can't get into all of that right now because it would take too much time. But other things that aren't disqualifying necessarily because of their criminality or let's say moral turpitude could still affect an application in this kind of more general good moral character way, and that's where the 5 years would be most relevant. Sometimes, if someone has something in their, let's say, in their background that happened, 4 years ago, that might not rise to the level of an automatic disqualifier, but doesn't look good for good moral character, we will advise them to wait and, apply after. And I should say that the operative date for something like that would be the date of the arrest, as opposed to the date that let's say if it was a case that went to court, conclusion of the matter, it would be the date of the arrest. So there's a lot of discretion on the part of the Immigration Service. There are many, criteria that are in the regulations and have been kind of evolving over time in the case law. There's also just a whole lot of discretion on the part of the government and that adjudicator who's sitting across the desk from the individual. So lying, fraud, misrepresentation are also going to be good moral character issues or concerns, which I mentioned before. As all of you know, the reading, writing, and speaking of English is another requirement for naturalization. I'm going to talk about some exceptions to that in a minute, as well as basic knowledge of U.S. civics and government. And then Another area that is relevant in some cases is, was the person required to register for the Selective Service, and did they do so? If not, why not, et cetera. Okay.
I just clarify number 3.
Yeah,
I have a student that goes to Mexico to visit her family every now and again. So she would have to not do that for 18 and 30 months before she would apply? The physical presence in the U.S. means she cannot go back to Mexico for 18, 30 months before she applies?
no.
6 months or longer.
So the total, for the third one, the total number of days physically present in the United States must be at least 30 months during her 5-year period. She would have to be able to show that in the preceding 5 years from when she was applying, that she was physically present in the United States for at least 30 months of that time.
Oh,
Mhm. Yeah. Or if, the person is applying based on marriage, the time is only 18 months, so.
When are they expected to file or to get into the Selective Service? I mean, if somebody's not a resident of this country, are they still expected to register for the Selective Service?
No, generally, there are many exceptions to that. Generally, we're talking about people who are green card holders,
okay.
lawful permanent residents who are males between 18 and 26.
Okay.
And then if they have registered, great. They or we can help them print out from the Selective Service website their registration information. If they haven't, I would say, again, anecdotally, that doesn't necessarily preclude them from successfully naturalizing. A lot of people do not realize that they were required to do so. Or let's say now they're 30 years old and they're applying for naturalization, they never registered for the Selective Service. They can just say honestly in their application that they did not know that they were expected to do so. And from our experience, that has been okay. Or if let's say they're 24 and they say, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to, but I just did yesterday and here's my proof, then that, okay. Mm-hmm.
Most of the people, or the males that have not registered that I've had, when they go down there, the immigration gives them a slip of paper to sign. They were unaware of the requirement, and that's satisfied.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, yeah.
That's the way it's been
Okay.
for the last year or two.
Okay,
With most of my males, I've only ever had one of all the ones I've tutored that registered.
mm-hmm,
And he forgot, contacted on his own Selective Service, found out he was registered, and had to change his address, and we got his Selective Service number, but
Okay.
every other one, no.
okay.
At first I wrote letters, and then later immigration gives them something to sign at the interview that they were unaware of it.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, that's good. We tend to, we have kind of some boilerplate